The week that everything broke, that is the theme of this video. I will try to have some sort of value as it relates to Fujifilm, in particular, bird photography, wildlife photography, that kind of thing, with the XF150-600. My struggle with getting like really sharp photos and some of the things that I have been learning and trying in order to get better results with that camera, the X-H2S in particular, but also the X-T5. And I think I can talk about this now. This is the TTArtisan Dot Sight. This is on their website now, so I don't think it's embargoed or anything like that, but they sent this to me a few weeks ago, and I broke it the very first time that I went out to start using it, to start testing it. Not the fault of the Dot Sight. It was just kind of a freak thing. I didn't really know what this was, so I reached out to TTArtisan to see if they had any lenses that I could maybe check out. And they said they didn't have any lenses, but they had this thing coming out and wondered if I would be interested in it. Apparently, Olympus or OM Systems makes a Dot Sight that has been pretty popular, and it works on any camera. So they're not really camera specific. They'll just go on any shoe mount on top of a camera. And they're meant to really assist in tracking and photographing like birds in flight, or really anything that's like really fast moving and maybe erratic. That's what they're for. And I've really been getting interested in and photographing a lot more birds lately. So I thought, hey, that would be cool. I will check that out. Thank you. But I broke it. And then I am also supposed to be making a review on a tripod. I'm not going to talk about that one in particular or specifically because I have reached out to the company and asked them, you know, hey, I'm having this problem, because I don't think that I broke it. My Vespa scooter also broke down on me this morning. I was going out to photograph some birds at sunrise, and at like the second stop sign down the road, it died. It shut off. Anyway, that sucked. Back to the tripod, which is more important. If I did break it, possibly, I've been transporting it on the back of the Vespa. It has a little luggage rack on the back of it, so I've been strapping the tripod onto the rack. So the rack is only like this wide, so it's only supporting the middle section of the tripod. So either end of the tripod is basically just hanging off. I wonder, you know, like maybe it's putting some sort of undue stress on some piece of the tripod, causing it to not work properly. I don't know. As I've been trying to test out these products, I've been going out to some local parks to photograph birds and whatever else. I feel like a lot of my photos aren't sharp. They don't have like a critical focus, and they don't have like a level of sharpness that I think they should. Which has been super frustrating. Should I start thinking about selling a lot of this Fuji gear and going back to Sony? Even though there's so much about Fujifilm that I really enjoy, that I've talked about previously. So I don't really want to do that. I mean, I still like Sony. I'm using a Sony camera. I never sold all my lenses, even though I sold all my previous bodies, and then I got another one just for shooting video. But I didn't want to, I didn't want to jump the gun. So I wanted to try to figure out what's going on here. I took the X-H2S out to photograph a lot and was having trouble. Didn't really think that the photos were sharp as they should be. And then so I did some tests with the X-T5. I took it out and really found kind of the same thing. You know, some photos would be sharp and some photos wouldn't be sharp. I feel like I'm crazy. As I am like editing this video and I'm looking through the photos, I'm starting to doubt like what I was even seeing in the first place. Especially these photos, I'm like, are they sharp? They look pretty freaking sharp. I'm probably falling into the trap of comparing my stuff to other people's stuff. I've been watching lots of photography YouTubers, bird photography, wildlife photography YouTubers. Their photos that they're showing in their videos look really sharp. They look really good. I don't know how much they have been edited. I don't know what they look like straight out of camera. So that's one thing. I've been watching videos by Simon d'Entremont. My French pronunciation is amazing. Pretty early in his YouTube channel, this video that I was watching, and a lot of the example photos he was showing, they weren't super sharp. They didn't look like they were really that in focus. He addressed that in the video. He said specifically, like, he got out of the habit of only looking for the sharpest photos, but rather he was looking for photos that told the most compelling story. So that's two things. A, don't compare yourself to others, and B, sharpness isn't necessarily the end-all be-all, potentially. I went down the rabbit hole of Adobe Lightroom possibly being the culprit. A lot of people maintain that Lightroom doesn't debayer the X-trans sensors on Fujifilm cameras as well as it could. People have issues with like this kind of wormy artifact, and I've seen that in some of my photos as well. I downloaded Darktable, which is an open source Photoshop alternative. No, it's not Darktable. That's the Lightroom alternative. GIMP. GIMP is the Photoshop alternative, although I haven't opened it up yet. There are alternatives to Lightroom. Capture One is one that people often say is much better at the debayering of Fujifilm X-Trans sensors than Lightroom. And then I also found on YouTube people were talking about DxO Pure Raw, which is a standalone program, but also can be used as a plugin within Lightroom and I guess probably Capture One. And it basically will debayer the raw photos from any camera and apply some special sauce like noise reduction and other sharpening algorithms. You can adjust, those kinds of parameters, but then it spits out a DNG. It still is a raw file, so you have all the ability to adjust it. So I downloaded that, and I'm just using a trial version. I'm not affiliated with them in any way. Man, the photos look amazing. And I also downloaded Capture One, and I'm using a 30-day free trial of that. So I wanted to try Capture One. But before I get into that, what I think is the problem, I don't think it's Lightroom. What I think is the culprit is ISO noise. This lens is an f5.6 to f8. So when you are zoomed out to 600 millimeters, the minimum aperture, the widest open that it can be is f8. Really fast shutter speeds, f8 aperture, the ambient light, whatever the light is in the environment where you're photographing. The result of all that is you often have a really high ISO. On these APS-C cameras, even though they're better than past APS-C cameras, the ISO performance still isn't that great. So I think like at ISO 3200, ISO 6400, and then especially ISO 12800, I have a pretty broad swath of my photographs at those three ISOs. The noise is really evident, especially if you get up to 12,800, the color noise starts becoming really prevalent. And I feel like that is the sort of veil of stuff that is preventing the photos from looking sharp. Because I do think that they are sharp. I think that the camera is getting focus most of the time, but it really is that ISO grain, that grain pattern from the sensor that is causing the photos to be crappy looking. If you get a good exposure in camera at a relatively high ISO, the resulting photograph in terms of noise is going to be pretty manageable, I think. The problem usually arises when you have underexposed and shot at a high ISO, and therefore you're having to boost the exposure in post. That's going to reveal a lot of pretty ugly noise artifacts. And it's not something that, like, I kind of knew that, but maybe I had just forgotten, or maybe I thought that I wasn't paying super close attention to the ISO when I was editing the photos, or maybe I just wasn't prepared to apply such a heavy-handed application of noise reduction. I didn't think that it needed it. The good thing about Lightroom is that their AI algorithm that has been added recently into Lightroom in the last year or so is amazing. I think it looks like basically what you can do with DxO, Pure Raw, or with DxO Labs, the full program, the Lightroom alternative. That looks amazing, but you could really do something very similar within Lightroom. And what I also like about Lightroom is that you can apply a slider and dial in exactly how much noise reduction you want and see it being applied in more or less real time. It does take some time to apply to the preview. I'm not an expert in Capture One by any means. I just started using it. In my very limited experience, the noise reduction is nowhere near as sophisticated as either Lightroom or DxO. So all that to say, I think these cameras are getting sharp photos with a heavy application of noise reduction. Every camera needs some noise reduction when the ISO is at a certain threshold. I don't want to get into a debate about full frame and APS-C, Micro Four Thirds, whatever. You could probably say, well, I could get as good or better results on full frame without applying so much noise reduction, and my photo isn't going to look as processed. That's probably true. But again, I don't want to get into that debate. What I want to say in this video is the problem that I was experiencing was basically high ISO and how to fix it. So I'm not going to sell the Fuji cameras. I'm happy to find that I can get really good results using some processing with whatever software. I also don't think that I need to switch away from Lightroom. although I would like to get rid of Adobe until they fix their shits. But one thing you'll find is people are wondering, like, what is an alternative, or what is an inexpensive alternative to Lightroom and Photoshop, presumably. And there are some open source things, but I haven't tried them. But DxO Lab and Capture One aren't inexpensive. And then they're also not Photoshop replacements, as far as I'm aware. So this week has been a total pain. Things have been breaking. My main mode of transportation is out of commission right now. I've had some problems with my Fujifilm cameras, not being satisfied with the level of sharpness or with the quality of the images that I've been capturing. With all that said, I have had a really fun week. It has been really fun to get out into some local parks and photograph some birds and other things. And I've been meeting a lot of people. I was researching good spots in Middle Tennessee to find birds. Radnor Lake was on the list, and it's close to me. The park, there is a pathway or a trailway that goes around the lake, circumnavigates the lake. At a certain point, you start seeing signs that say eagle nesting grounds, do not disturb, or stay on the path, etc. I had no idea that there were eagles out there. I didn't see any eagles, unfortunately, but I was like, holy shit, I didn't know that there were eagles out here. That is really freaking cool. So as I got around to the other side of the lake, opposite where those signs were, there was a gentleman who was photographing. He was on a tripod with a long telephoto lens, and he was pointed out directly across to the hills, to the wood line across the lake. And I was like, what are you looking at? And he said, an eagle. On that day was like, it started out foggy, so it was overcast and kind of dreary, but kind of a cool vibe, and you'll see that in some photographs here. It was basically like a green wall, and the leaves are starting to turn a little bit early this year, but mostly green. And then you can see the giant bald eagle clear as day because its head is so massive, and it's just a bright white ball in the midst of all this green. It just stands out. It's so easy to see it. But it was far away, but it was so awesome to see that eagle. We're just talking, I was asking him about the eagles and, his experience and everything. And while we were talking, it took off, and we were like, oh shit, it's moving. So snap, snap, snap. The great thing about the X-H2S, electronic shutter, silent shutter, but also super fast. I think I was probably in 20 frames per second, which is half as much as it can actually do. But I snapped off a ton of photos and got some really good sharp photos of that eagle flying. It's still really far away. 1.5 teleconverter is definitely on the horizon, but it was just so much fun. It was so cool to see that. I had no expectation of seeing a bald eagle there, and especially the first time I'd been out there. So I'm like addicted to it now. And I went back out there a couple days ago and saw two of them at the same time. But going back to the theme of meeting people, I've met so many photographers. So that guy, his name is Ron. A friend of his is Bob, and he's like a Vanderbilt professor. I'm not sure if he's retired. So I ran into him later, and we were at the Eagle, the Eagle vantage point, talking about the eagles. And he was giving me all this advice and like all this experience about like how you can photograph the eagles. Not only that, but he was talking about the green herons. He showed me a spot where hummingbirds feed. We went to it and we saw a hummingbird. It didn't stick around long enough to photograph, but it's been super frustrating that stuff has gone wrong mechanically, essentially. But it's been a really awesome week in terms of just seeing really cool stuff, getting some decent photographs of some cool stuff, and then learning sort of more about the camera system that I am using. Not sort of being like, oh, let me just sell it and buy something better, I don't know. I think that's everything that I wanted to ramble about. And I hope something in there was interesting to you. Cool beans. Thanks for watching, and see you in some other video, possibly.